This has been plaguing drummers for decades. How do we play hi-hat grooves with right hand crossed over without sticks clashing, but without having to raise our hi-hats up super high or have the hi-hats over here via a remote hi-hat stand? Well, there are a few solutions to this, and I'll offer some logistical, ergonomic kinds of tips to help you out with this today. But ultimately, there's something I like to call the windshield wiper motion or the drawbridge motion that's actually going to be your ultimate secret to success here. So let's dig into all of this today. Hey, if you are struggling in any way with knowing what to practice, like you feel like you lack clarity, direction, you're not really growing in your practicing, check out the free guide in the description. Know what to practice, make faster progress in less time, even if you've just got 30 minutes a day. The 3-part daily practice routine that shows you exactly what the specifics are you need to be working on regularly to make sure you're growing, especially if you're busy, especially if you're self-taught, especially if you're just short on time. Really great guide. It's been helping thousands of drummers really get results and know what they're doing each time they sit down to practice. It'll most definitely help you get out of a rut. So go check that out as we get rolling today. Okay, so the first thing that we have to play around with a little bit here is hi-hat placement, hi-hat height, just some of these basic logistical things that you can definitely play around with, and sometimes you can find some solutions in this. If you get your hi-hats in the right spot, you might be able to avoid some of this and at least feel more comfortable. So just to let you in a little on what my positioning here is and why it is what it is, I have to first say that I'm about 6'4". I'm tall. And so if you're shorter than I am, you're probably going to end up with something slightly different. But the general reasoning behind this setup, if the Remo logo on my snare is 12 o'clock, so it's like a clock, 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, you always want to face toward the middle of your snare when you're sitting at the kit. You don't actually want to face toward the kick drum. You want to face this way, so right leg is going towards the kick, left leg is going toward the hi-hat, just like this. Snare is in the middle, so that means that really the hi-hat is 45-degree angle, so it's at 10:30 on the clock here, and it's slightly overlapping. That's become my sweet spot. Now, I've played around with moving this around a bunch, and like when I was in high school, I would experiment with having the hi-hats really close because my thinking was, well, if I have them really close, it's easier to go back and forth between hi-hat and snare, especially when playing alternating hands, which seems pretty logical, but of course the problem there was that my leg was getting super cramped up. I play heel down on the kick, heel up primarily on the hi-hat, so being heel up here, I can get by with it being a little bit closer. I don't need a lot of space, but at the same time, I want to make sure that I'm maintaining that 90-degree plus leg angle down here, that angle from upper leg to lower leg. You don't want that to be tighter than 90 degrees. It needs to be a little bit greater than that. So I'm still able to maintain that with it here. I really can't come any closer. If I go any farther, it's too much of a reach. So I would encourage you to try to find a spot about like this, where I know your actual distances are going to be different because your height's different, but in terms of proportion and ratio, this is about the angle that makes sense to have the hi-hats. For me, it might make sense for you too, because that's the angle my arm's coming at. My right arm comes in here and naturally wants to land right here, and so it just makes sense. Now in terms of height, this is where it kind of gets interesting because raising the hi-hats up higher would definitely be a quick solution to the stick clash. We have the hi-hats way up here, then the sticks probably wouldn't be clashing. But the problem with that is if you have the hats really high, then unless you're going to play at a really steep angle, you end up having to lift your elbow up a lot and play like this, which just looks ridiculous. Now, there are some rock drummers who do that, and I've seen like heavy rock drummers put their hi-hats like rack mounted way up high, so they're like going like this while they're playing. It looks crazy, but you know, if you're a rock drummer, you do what you have to do to look crazy. I would much rather have my hi-hats lower because I don't like playing at a steep angle on them. If you've ever had any trouble with playing lightly and smoothly and quickly on the hats, like that kind of pattern, you can't do that if you're at a steep angle. I mean, you can, but it's forced, it's clumsy, it's awkward, doesn't feel good. But it's much more fluid, just much more smooth. When you're at this angle, where you're using this part of the stick, and rather than being steep, you're almost parallel, where the tip is almost touching, but not quite. And the reason why that's the case is because look at this. If I toss the stick down right here, no rebound. But if I toss it down here, not a lot of rebound, but there's some. And that does make a big difference. Just that little bit of rebound helps. Of course, the tighter the hats are, it does increase a little bit. And of course, if you've got the tip landing, well, then there's a lot of rebound. But most of the time, we want the sound of right here. And so if you're wanting that extra rebound out of the hi-hat, then you want to be able to play at this angle. which means having the hats lower and not up so high. So that was a compromise I was willing to make. The whole concept of rebound, by the way, we're going to circle back to this at the end of the video. This is some foreshadowing. We want to have a little bit of rebound when we're playing off the hats. And so my hi-hats are about as high as the American flag on a pair of Vic First sticks. I have the stick sitting here on my snare. So that is that far. That's not very high. Like, we're getting kind of into the realm of where a lot of jazz drummers might have their hats, where because jazz drummers are playing more on top and not on the edge like rock drummers are, they'll have the hats pretty low. And so I'm getting close to being in that territory. And so potentially, there's a lot of potential for there to be stick clash. And so I've had to develop some workarounds for this. Because the truth is, you might spend months and years finding the perfect placement for your hats, but you're still running into stick clash. Because look at this. My natural positioning here is like right here. Lots of potential for that. I remember early on in my playing, I thought, well, I need to have my hands positioned like this. So I need to have the hats way over here, or my snare further this way, so that right hand is more directly on top of left. And in theory, that makes sense, but it felt so weird and it just didn't work. So I've ended up landing right here. So that could be you. And if you've been playing around with hi-hat height and placement and all of that, and you're still having these logistical errors and you're just not really sure what to do, sometimes you gotta try other solutions. Sometimes position is not the end-all be-all. There's not a perfect position. That's what I've realized. There's not a perfect height. There's not a perfect placement. There's always going to be compromises. You're having to balance things out, and so we really have to go a little bit deeper here. So if that's you, what is your next step? Well, there are 3 solutions. First, we're going to go through 2 that are pretty simple. So 2 pretty simple, straightforward, not necessarily easy to implement, but very simple. And then a 3rd solution that is probably the more complex one. It's still simple. It just takes a little bit of practice to actually do it. So we'll break down all of these so you'll know exactly what to do. The first one is this: play open-handed. I know that's the duh, and you might even be frustrated that I even say that, because it's like, well, yeah, it's simple, but it's not easy to play open-handed. And I don't blame you. I will never primarily play open-handed. I'm even a lefty, but I would rather play this way. This just feels natural. Right hand is a timekeeping hand. Let's keep it that way. But there is no problem at all in shifting to open-handed. It honestly makes more sense. The only reason we play this way is because the early drum set players were right-handed and they couldn't keep time with their left hand. And so drummers back in the early jazz days were playing with the right hand on the hi-hats, and that's what we've always done. And actually, if you think about it, the early days of the drum set, jazz was the primary popular music, and everybody was crossing over. They didn't have the issue of stick clash because they weren't playing loud backbeats. But then a few decades later, getting into the 50s, 60s, backbeats start coming around, and then drummers start playing more heavy rock, harder backbeats, but we're still crossing over. Suddenly we've got these issues going on that we didn't have in the early jazz days. So it's kind of interesting, the evolution of that. All that to say, it is not wrong to play open-handed, and if you would rather do that, by all means. I know it's a little bit tougher, it's a little trickier because you're having to fix that weak hand, balance out your hands for one thing, but it's very worth being able to do. There are a lot of songs that I've played where I'd rather be able to reach over here and play some tom stuff, so it just makes more sense to have the left hand on the hi-hat instead. That kind of pattern, in order to play that with right hand on the hi-hat, you would need extra toms over here, or you'd have to do some ridiculous cross under and it wouldn't make sense. So being able to play open-handed does open you up to some more possibilities. So definitely worth practicing. Just start by practicing basic grooves you already know. Just like that, and it'll come together. It's hard at first, but you'll get it. Second simple solution, and this one might be the simplest because it doesn't require extra mental, coordination practice. All we're going to do is shift our right hand from right here to right here. And it makes a lot of sense logistically because suddenly we're no longer crossing over. We're clearing the right stick out of the way, so now there's room right here for the left stick to move. The hi-hat sounds just as good right here, feels just as good as it does right here. Same response, everything's still totally the same, it's great. The only con to this is you're having to reach your arm out further, which can feel a little bit awkward and not as relaxed, and you might have to feel like you're leaning forward a little bit. You don't want to really lean forward, but you are having to reach your arm out, so it can be potentially awkward. But here's when this comes into play. If I'm ever playing a quick hi-hat pattern, or especially if it's shuffled, with those types of patterns, because it's so quick, I'm having to keep the stick down close to the hi-hat. There's a lot of potential for clash. It doesn't work well right here. Right there, the sticks didn't clash, but I felt like they were going to. And so I'm always expecting clash, and so it causes me to tense up. So if I'm doing something like that that's quick, especially if it's a shuffle, I would rather just move my hand out to here. That's totally fine. Yes, we're theoretically breaking some rules, but who cares? We do what we got to do. We do what works. And so I would say the only con to that is that it might not feel as relaxed because you're having to extend your arm. But it can make a lot of sense. If there's a lot of left-hand action going on or there's quick right-hand timekeeping, it might be your best solution. It's super simple, easy to do, and you can do it without moving the hi-hats at all, because I can keep mine in the same spot here at 10:30, play right here, or play right here. But I told you there's a third method that I think is ultimately the best, because the thing is, in my years of trying to figure this out and like, how do I navigate this? How do I keep it from being stick clash? How do I feel comfortable when I've got to play loudly or when I've got to play quick timekeeping? How do I make all this work? And really the best solution is to use stick height to your advantage. Let your right stick be somewhat like a drawbridge, where every time you hit the hats, it's lifting up and opening up so there's room for the left stick to move. And so what happens is kind of this windshield wiper motion. That's why I like to call it that, where it's like sticks are moving together like this, like windshield wipers might move. Right stick is like a drawbridge lifting up, so left stick always has room to move underneath. And so if you're doing this, it doesn't matter where things are positioned, how much potential for stick clash there is. If right stick is always out of the way, there's never going to be stick clash. And so we no longer have to pick apart, oh, where do we have our hi-hats? Where are we crossing over? What's our stick position? We don't have to overanalyze that and get crazy with those details. Suddenly all these things solve themselves if right stick is always out of the way. And so you can see each of those times I was hitting the snare, I was able to have stick height with the left stick, which is important because if you're going to play a firm backbeat, you've got to have stick height. You can't keep it choked down and expect to play strong and consistently. You've got to have stick motion. But every time the stick needed to come up, every time the left stick needed to come up, right stick was moving out of the way. So in order to do that, I wasn't hitting the hi-hat harder, I was just artificially rebounding it. I was creating some artificial rebound. So I remember a few minutes ago when I showed you that, no rebound, versus this, a little bit of rebound. We want to maximize that little bit of rebound. Take advantage of that. And instead of playing like this, or see how the stick comes down and it pauses right here, then we have to lift it back up. That's not a smooth, even way to play because there's a pause in the motion. We want to establish a regular motion, like a circle. Think of it like a circle, where the stick is just constantly moving and never pausing. And all I'm doing to do that, I'm somewhat using an index finger fulcrum here, a little bit firmer of a grip than I might normally use so that I can lift the stick. But I'm not lifting my wrist much, it's kind of just a gentle toss, extending the fingers, taking advantage of that little bit of spring kickoff there, and then lifting it up the rest of the way. So what I'm doing is not playing louder. If I were playing louder, I might be using some arm, it might be getting crazy. I'm still staying light. I'm just gently bringing the stick up the rest of the way. So we have this continuous motion. Now, there's a lot of reasons why this is a good thing. And having continuous motion like this in full stick height actually results in better timekeeping. Timekeeping is steadier, we don't rush, everything just feels better and more consistent. So in and of itself, this is a great thing. But it's also really great because it allows this space for the left hand. What we're doing here is we're using stick height to our advantage. We're using stick height to allow smooth, fluid navigation. And this applies to as you're moving around the kit. You know, you always want to be bouncing from one surface to the other, where we're never pausing anywhere. We're not going. Never doing that. We want to always be moving in these arc motions. And so if we apply that mindset here to the hi-hats, then that naturally causes the stick clash to solve itself because we have this drawbridge sort of thing. So how do we practice this? From a practical standpoint, how do we get comfortable with this? Because we can't be on a gig playing a song and having to think about this because then it's going to mess everything up. This has to be autopilot, this has to be natural so that stick clash is by default not happening. So what I want you to do is start off by just playing quietly on the hi-hat, about this tempo. Remember, we want to be this stick position. We're not playing super steep, we're not playing on top, which would make this easier, but most of the time sound-wise, we'd rather be here on the edge. What I want you to do is gradually increase your stick height, but try to not get louder. It might get a little bit louder, and that's okay. We're not going to be super OCD about it. But increase your stick height, but try to not let the hi-hat get loud. To my ear, that didn't get louder. Start off quiet. It's pretty soft. Increasing stick height. Maybe it got barely louder, but not by much. We've got this full stick height, so we're literally just going like this. Practice air playing. Just air playing. This is all we're doing. it's literally like we're air playing because we don't have much rebound helping us out. And so if you can get your right hand to do this, got the stick kind of somewhat firmly cradled here with the index finger and middle finger. And so we're just tossing it back and forth. That's all we're doing. Don't overthink it. This is the motion we want to establish, and we're just using the hi-hat as what we're hitting here. So get that going, then add in the snare so that you're doing this. It's literally the windshield wiper thing. So just practice playing quarters, eighths, however you want to count these, both hands. You'll notice how the sticks are always clearing one another. If right hand is coming up out of the way, left stick is not going to hit. No matter how fast or slow you're going, when they're going at the same time like that, you're good, you're clear. So practice doing that. Start off slow. Lots of artificial stick kite here while not hitting the hi-hats hard. Let the left stick be a full stroke. So everything is full stroke going up to 12 o'clock or even further, making sure everything clears. I know this can feel a little bit weird at first. It might seem counterintuitive. It might seem a little strange, but I assure you, this is going to be your best solution because it won't matter. Like you could sit down at a house kit, sit down at somebody else's kit, maybe not have time to adjust before it's time for your band to play, but you'll still be able to pull this off because you'll be able to make any setup work. It won't have to be perfect in order to work because we're using our technique. In other words, we're with our bodies, with our technique here, we're making sure that we can make this happen regardless of setup perfection. So we're able to circumvent, is that the word? Circumvent, we're able to go around the potential issue of kit setup and ergonomics and logistics and solve the problem on our own, which is a very powerful tool. Then the next thing you can do is practice doing left hand on the offbeat. So if right hand is playing eighth notes, left hand is playing on the 16th subdivisions, E's and U's. So like 1, E and or 1 and 2 and doesn't matter. Point is we're going right, left, right, left. So instead of playing together, we're alternating. Now that makes this a little bit trickier. What I like to do when doing this is actually not bounce the snare stick up, but keep it down here. By default, whenever I play a backbeat on the snare, I'll let the stick choke out and stay down here in preparation for playing any ghost notes instead of letting it come back up all the way. And so that's just what I do. And so every time after I play, I can lift up and then play the next note. And so right stick is still up here out of the way every time we do that. And until you get really fast, you're not going to run into clash. That means you can play busy, loud, syncopated 16th grooves and not have the sticks running into each other. Now you'll find there's a certain tempo threshold there where as you get faster, you're not able to get the right stick far enough out of the way without it being super loud. And so if you're still trying to not get super loud on the hi-hats, but you're trying to stay loud on the snare and you're getting faster, it can start to get a little crazy. And that's where our second solution a few minutes ago of sliding right hand out to here can really make sense. And so if I were playing a fast groove that involves like rim shot offbeats on the snare on weird parts of the beat, that's what I would end up doing. That way I'm not having to lift the right stick so far out because eventually when you get faster, it's impossible to have a lot of stick height without getting loud for wanting to stay somewhat chill here. And so that's why there's not one way to do this. You have to use a combination of these different methods, but for the most part, this stick lifting method is going to be the best, especially when you're just playing basic grooves and all you want to do is have enough stick height to play a firm backbeat without sticks getting tangled. It's very normal and natural and okay for sticks to get tangled when you're playing something really fast, and so that's why it makes sense to clear out to here. But most of the time, most grooves aren't going to be like that. Most grooves are not going to be super loud, unless you're playing a lot of like punk rock and things like that. Then you might be in that territory and you might be living here a lot. But for the most part, a lot of the offbeats can be ghosted, can be a little softer and not require as much stick height. And so you can keep your right hand right here and just make sure you're always lifting the stick out of the way. Practicing all of this and feeling comfortable with this does require a level of coordination, because we're having to think about coordinating different aspects of what we're doing. We might only be doing like 3 limbs here. We're not really using the left foot. This might just be 3 limbs, but we're having to think very intentionally about these motions, which does require some coordination. And if that's something that you struggle with, or you feel like you've been stuck there, you've plateaued with your coordination, and you're looking to go to the next step, find your next step, then most definitely download that free e-guide I told you about, the 3-part daily 30-minute practice routine, so that you know what to practice. It is full, the coordination part, so that's part 2. Part 1 is hand technique, part 2 is coordination, part 3 is listening skills, music, how to listen to melody and play musically and create the right parts. The coordination part in the middle of that guide is so extensive, because we go through all these different very specific concrete things that you can practice in order to build your coordination in a lot of different ways, a lot of different styles and contexts. And so I can honestly say that guide will provide you with years worth of practicing if you use all this stuff to its full potential and you dedicate 30 minutes a day to working at it. And so definitely go check that out. This guide's been helping thousands of drummers have clarity and direction. It's been really cool hearing from people how much this guide has helped them, because it's so specific. And it's not just think about this or try this or apply this mindset. No, we do some of that. I like the conceptual. The conceptual is great. But we do a lot of very concrete, specific things. And so it's definitely going to help you out, provide a lot of guidance, help build your coordination, which is going to help with everything we covered today. So, hey, if you're new to the channel, if this was the first non-glamorous lesson you've seen, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Be sure to subscribe. We got a whole bunch more lessons. I want you to go deeper. I want you to dig deeper into this. And so definitely go download that guide. I'll send you some extra special free content to help you out with even more of your coordination and even your hand technique too, because that's a big important part of this. And so go grab that before you go. As always, thanks so much for watching. Stay non-glamorous.